प्रकाशित हुआ। उन्होंने सिनेमा और अन्य ऑडियो विजुअल मीडियम्स पर कई राष्ट्रीय और अंतर्राष्ट्रीय संगोष्ठी सम्मेलनों में योगदान दिया है। आप बिहार के मुख्य सचिव के पद से सेवानिवृत्त हुए हैं और वर्तमान में स्टेट चीफ इंफॉर्मेशन कमिश्नर बिहार के रूप में कार्यरत हैं। श्री त्रिपुरारी शरण जी। निवेदन करते हैं कार्यक्रम के अध्यक्ष श्री अरुण खोपकर जी से कि वे कार्यक्रम का शुरुआत करें। धन्यवाद।
To be the next speaker and the last speaker.
I have a formal presentation, not in terms of a slideshow or anything of that kind, but a formal presentation which I will read out. But before that, to give you a context, give you the context, I want to narrate a few small little nuggets that I have gathered in my life and during the course of my tenure at the audiovisual medium institutions. You know, there was a student during my time at the Film Institute in Pune who was making his diploma film. And I asked him, what is your film about? So he said, sir, it's a Bhojpuri film. You know, he knew that I had a weakness for our languages from my part of the country. So he said, sir, it's a Bhojpuri film. And so I'll show you the rough cuts. I'll show you, and then you can decide whether you want to give me more facility to expand the film the way I want to. Anyway, I will not get into the details of what happened on that front, but my production manager used to come back to me every now and then and tell me, sir, ये तो कुछ कर रहा नहीं है, खाली सुबह में कैमरा लेके जाता है, पूरा प्रोडक्शन टीम को लेके जाता है और शाम को चलाता है वो टेकड़ी पर से, you know, टेकड़ी is पहाड़ी in the Marathi language. So I said, यार ऐसा है, Sheikh was the name of my production manager, उसको जो मन है करने दो, as long as he does not overshoot the resources allocated or that can be allocated for a diploma film, you don't tell him anything. Anyway, the film was ready. There were no dialogues in the film. It was virtually a silent film. And, you know, everybody sort of used to be a little cynical about this Sinha character, the student. I'm forgetting his first name, Sam Sinha. He was a Bengali Sinha. So he was quite a character. I don't know, Arun, if you remember him from your days. You must have taken his master class or something like that. I don't know. Yeah. But anyway, so people send, I mean, the students send their films to film festivals from there. And the next thing that I learned was that this boy's film actually won the Golden Bear for short films in Berlin Film Festival. There were no dialogues in the film, mind you. Okay? And he said it's a Bhojpuri film. So I asked him, how is it a Bhojpuri film when I can't hear any Bhojpuri dialogue? So all that apart, you will find the context for what I'm saying just now. But the next thing that I wanted to also flag here is, we've talked about Murtaza Sahab ne adaptation ki aur Shakespeare ki baat ki hai. It is high time now we move away from that domain of adaptation of Shakespearean plays, because in this today's discourse of decolonization, we recognize how and why Shakespeare came to India. So at the risk of being outwitted by my literary friends who have earned their living all their lives teaching Shakespeare and dwelling upon Shakespeare's various virtues, I would again urge that in this era of decolonization, we should, I mean, in this decolonization era is already over. In the discourse which has found center stage, as far as decolonization is concerned, we should jettison the idea of adapting Shakespearean plays. Number 3, one of the fundamental differences that we speak of, or at least we try to speak of, and also teach the students of cinema, and all, I think, sensible film schools across the world talk about this, is the difference between showing and telling. What is the difference? If something you can tell by just showing, then do you need to tell? And if something that you can show by just showing, then do you need to tell? That is the fundamental difference we try to initiate our students into as far as cinema is concerned. Arun, I hope I'm not wrong on that count.
No, I think it's a very valid point, and
yeah, so anyway,
I'm
why
glad
this
that
has
you
come
made
up
that
into my
point.
mind is because Ratnutma has mentioned about Satyajit Ray. Now, without even going into the domain of the quality of the output that came out of Satyajit Ray's venture into Premchand's territory, I would just ask you to imagine one thing. Shatranj ke khiladi, the first line says, वाजिद अली शाह का जमाना था, लखनऊ विलासिता के रंग में डूबा हुआ था. I remember this almost dot to dot. वाजिद अली शाह का जमाना था, लखनऊ विलासिता के रंग में डूबा हुआ था. Now, as a reader, Premchand leaves to you to imagine for yourself what it could be. What does it mean? लखनऊ विलासिता के रंग में डूबा हुआ था. So, he leaves it to your imagination. And your imagination would obviously be circumscribed by your cultural and your intellectual and social boundaries. But Ray has essayed it in his own way. And I do not know how many people have tried comparing their own imagination from the literary world and their imagination which comes across to them from seeing what Ray has shown. But what I'm saying is that we all, whether it is in the world of literature or in the world of cinema, we all try to speak to an universal idiom. And decoding what is that universal idiom that actually hits the center stage in your brain and excites those moments which give fodder to your heart and to your brain both, is something which is which has been the biggest problematic in the world of creativity. So from here, I would like to go on to my formal this thing, and we've talked about we are on the topic of cinema, relationship between cinema and literature. So I would start by saying that we live in a fractured world, fractured in the sense of being bipolar, multipolar, or simply without a coherent alignment. It thus follows naturally that our sensibilities would also not have a universal rhythm. However, literature on cinema does talk of certain universal idioms in the domain of cinema. Mise-en-scène and the use of sound and different dimensions of lighting, even though employed differently, convey a certain core of meaning which can be traced to the universal domain. It is here that a distinction needs to be made between popular or blockbuster cinema on the one hand and art house cinema on the other. Several classics of literature have been reworked into cinema across different cultural spaces across the world, and people have talked about it. Epics and classics have been reworked in Hindi cinema too. Shudrak's Mrichakatikam comes to mind immediately, along with Shyam Benegal's Utsav. In popular adaptations, a reworking of literature into cinema there are limitations on the filmmaker's creativity in terms of the extent to which he can play around with the kernel of the storyline. However, in the hands of a master, even this is possible, with the possible outcome of an even equally, if not more, engaging outcome. This is why I refer to Shatranj Ke Khiladi and Ray's handling of those two lines, just two lines. How beautifully he has captured the essence of that era of Wajid Ali Shah's time. This was most eminently illustrated by the way, and people have talked about Kurosawa, it was most eminently illustrated by the way Kurosawa picked up the famous Japanese writer Rainosuke Akutagawa's short story. It's again a short story in a bamboo grove to make his acclaimed film Rashomon. Now, Ratnotma has talked about film scripts being made into, being given the status of literature. Isn't that right, Ratnotma? Fortunately, during my years as an actor in theatre in Delhi here, we did Rashomon, an adaptation of Rashomon, the film, into theatre, and of course that was not an original play, that was not an original script. It came from the Broadway theatre, and my friend Faisal Al-Qazi had managed to bring it from there, and we were amongst the first people to do a staging of Rashomon. So that script is now universally recognized as a very valuable contribution of Akutagawa into the world of literature, and it is recognized equally in his own country, in Japan, because I also had the good luck of seeing an adaptation of Rashomon in Kabuki theatre, which was something so absolutely wonderful. I cannot begin to even narrate that experience. Anyway, across all cultures, there's been a distinction between the popular and the elite in general. So it is in cinema too. And that is why I talked about blockbuster cinema being made from works of literature. In the domain of a rough equivalence between elite culture and art house cinema, the question of reworking literature into cinema acquires a different dimension altogether. Here, I would like to bring in the question of how literature may interact with cinema at the hands of an auteur. Again, I go back to Satyajit Ray and Shatranj Ke Khiladi and take you back to your imagination of Lucknow as has been narrated by Premchand in his story. And if you have seen Satyajit Ray's Shatranj Ke Khiladi, the film, then as depicted by him. Anyway, here I am reminded of the time I first viewed Alain René's Last Year at Marienbad, and this was almost as many years back as I am old today, which is about 64 years, and I must say I was dumbstruck at the kind of liberties that the filmmaker had taken with the narrative structure in this film. This is not based on René's film, which came to be a cult film of the French New Wave, is not based on any literary work. But, you know, he evolved, I mean, the whole French New Wave evolved an idiom of its own, and it went on to acquire a cult status across the world. But what I'm trying to say is that each medium speaks to the whole question of universalism of idioms in its own way. And
Yeah,
so it has been
me,
in the case of French New Wave.
Excuse my interruption. I have about 3 minutes.
One moment. Today, almost 3/4 of a century since this cult film of the French New Wave was made, I wonder if the great auteurs of French New Wave would have been comfortable with a three-line story structure for making this film. Even though Alain Robbe-Grillet is the writer of, so-called writer of Last Year in Marienbad, it can be safely said that in the hands of any other filmmaker, the contours of the outcome would have been almost unrecognizably different. Adaptation, reworking, or intersection, whatever term we employ to convey the meaning of one medium being the source of the other, one cardinal fact must not be lost sight of, and that is that, shorn of all its frills and fancies, what rests at the heart of cinema is storytelling. And what eventually matters for audiences across cultures is how the filmmaker negotiates the crucial plot points in this storytelling. The world of literature has only words to stoke the imagination of the reader, but the world of cinema has a whole gamut of artifice for the filmmaker to employ for his work to acquire a whole gamut of interpretations and suggestions. It is for this reason, possibly, that popular cinema is rarely based on great works of literature, except maybe a few exceptions here and there. If someone pipes up to say, what about Godfather? It can be safely said that there is a lot of ambiguity on the question of the status of Mario Puzo's work as a piece of literature. However, in this era of postmodernist aberrations and post-truth certainties, nothing may amaze us, especially when Bob Dylan can win the Nobel and Guljar Saab may be conferred with the Gyanpith. Beyond the vehement subjectivities of an auteuristic cinema, it is equally important to state here that the reverse process of film to books or novelization, Ratnuttama has referred to it, novelization as it is popularly known as, is not something that should be deeply investigated into. A writer conceives his creation in his own way. His main tool is the written word, and whereas the main tool of a filmmaker is a whole basket of things, from the moving image to how this moving image is juxtaposed with other images and married with accompanying sound. Suffice it to say here that while films may provide a fragment of an idea for a writer to expand upon, any normative prescription in this regard would be tantamount to slicing the intellectual and creative sovereignty of the writer. A writer speaks to the vehement subjectivities of life and living in his own way. A film may speak to it in its own way. The points where they intersect are the precious takeaways, the social and intellectual domain of a nation, for the social and intellectual domain of a nation, country, and society. Thank you.